Hello everyone, this is Nikhil Wakade, and today in this session we are going to talk about Angular framework. So before moving ahead, a small introduction about myself. As I completed my bachelor's in information technology from VSET in 2017, and then I worked with Infosys for 3.3 years as a front-end developer, and recently I've been working with MasterCard as an SDE2. So let's first try to understand what Angular framework actually means. Well, Angular is one of the best frameworks for web development which is available out there in the market, and it is a TypeScript based open source framework for building client-side web applications. Since TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, let us first understand JavaScript briefly. JavaScript runs on a client side of the web, which can be used to design or program how the web page behaves on the occurrence of an event. So typically JavaScript is used for interface interactions, slideshows, and other interactive components. JavaScript also deals with dynamic content, which is an important aspect of web development. Dynamic content refers to constantly changing content, and it adapts to specific uses. For example, JavaScript can be used to determine whether or not to render a mobile version of a website by checking the device which is accessing the website. This encouraged web developers to start creating their own custom JavaScript libraries for reducing the number of code lines and implementing complex functionalities easily. For example, jQuery is a fast, small, and feature-rich JavaScript library which make things like HTML document traversal and manipulation, then event handling, animation, and Ajax, which is much simpler with an easy-to-use API. Because of all this feature, jQuery became extremely powerful, which is very easy to use. But since just because jQuery has no real structure, the developer has full freedom to build project as they see fit. However, the lack of structure also means that it is easier to fall into traps of complex code, which can lead to confusion in larger projects with no clear design direction or code maintainability. For this situation, a framework like Angular can be a big help. So now let's talk about the different features of Angular. First one is easier to learn. Angular is more modern and easier for developers to learn as it is more streamlined framework where developers will be focusing on writing JavaScript classes. Next is good IDE support. As I've already mentioned that Angular is written in TypeScript and it supports all ECMAScript 6 features like let and const keyword, then we have arrow function, then rest operator, things like that. And many IDEs like Eclipse, Microsoft Visual Studio, and Sublime Text has a really good support for TypeScript. Then next comes Familiar. Angular has retained many of its core concepts from its earlier version, that is Angular 1 and also known as Angular JS, though it is a complete rewrite. This means developers who are already proficient in Angular 1 will find it easy to migrate to Angular. Then we have cross-platform. Angular is a single platform which can be used to develop application for multiple devices, be it for desktop or mobile. Then it comes lean and fast. Angular application production bundle size is reduced by hundreds of kilobytes, due to which it loads much more faster during its execution. Then comes simplicity. Angular follows component based programming, which is a feature of web development, we can say, and each component we create is isolated from every other part of our application, and because of this feature it is considered to be as one of the simple framework to learn. So now let's try to understand the actual architecture of an Angular application. As you can see on screen, there are different building blocks of an Angular application. On the top left corner, you see there are different module components, module services, module functions. Then at the bottom, we have an injector which holds different services and it is interacting with different Angular components. Then on the top right corner, we have an actual directive which directly interacts with the template, which is nothing but a file which holds the code for user interface. And altogether, the component and the template interacts with each other through an event binding or property binding. So we'll be covering each block in detail as we move ahead. So first we are going to cover modules. Angular apps are modular, and to maintain modularity we have Angular modules, or you can say ng module. Every Angular app contains at least one Angular module, that is the root module. Generally it is named as app module. For example, when we create an Angular application using Angular CLI, the default module that is going to get created is also named as an app module. So a module is a cohesive block of code with a related set of capabilities that have a specific workflow, and any Angular module is a class with @ng module decorator, as you can see on the screen. Decorators are functions that modify JavaScript classes. For example, decorators are basically used for attaching metadata to classes so that it knows the configuration of those classes and how they should be treated. So as we can see, there are different properties that come under Angular module. The first one is declarations. The classes that are related to Vue or they belong to this module are going to come under this declaration array. The next one comes is exports. The classes that should be accessible to the components of other modules are going to come under this exports array. Then we have imports. Similarly, the classes which are exported by other modules and are needed by the component of this module are going to come under the imports. Then we have providers. Services present in one of the module which are to be used in the other modules or components are going to come under this array. So once a service is included in the providers, it becomes accessible in all parts of that application. Then we have bootstrap. So it holds the root component, which is the main view of the application, and this root module only has this property, and it indicates the component that is to be bootstrapped. Now let's talk about components in Angular. A component controls one or more sections on the screen called a view. For example, if you're building a codeless application, you can have components like app component, which is going to act as a container, which is then going to hold a different component called a course component, which will in turn hold another component called as course detail component. So inside a component, you define the component's application logic, that is how does it supports the view. The class interacts with the actual view through different properties and methods. So here in the component, as you can see, first we are going to import the component and the dependencies that we require in our component using the import keyword. Then we attach the metadata of the component using @component decorator. Therein we have three different properties. The first one is selector, which holds a special keyword and it can be used as a tag name. So every component in an Angular application can be treated as a tag similar to a p tag, dev tag, span tag, which we have in HTML5 application. And using this keyword, we can introduce this component into any other component in the same module. Then we have template URL, which is an HTML file which is going to hold the actual user interface code. Then we have an array of styles URL, which is going to hold or which is going to point different CSS style sheets which you want to apply to this specific component. Then after the metadata, we specify the logic of the component which resides inside the class. We specify the constructor, and inside it we specify the variables and the methods which needs to be initialized when the class is created. Then we also have ngOnInit method that is called when the component is instantiated. Moving ahead, we have templates. A template is nothing but a form of HTML tags that tells Angular about how to render the component. A template looks like a regular HTML except for a few differences, that it is going to hold different properties and different syntax. As we can see on screen, we have a variable name in curly braces, then we have a router link property on anchor tag, then we have ng for written in li tag. So that is going to tell the component how to interact with the template itself. Let's talk about metadata. So it is something that helps understand Angular how to process a class. To tell Angular that course component is a component, metadata is attached to the class. In TypeScript, we attach metadata by using a decorator, and this is what we have done in the code displayed on the screen. Here, at the component decorator, which identifies the class immediately below it as a component, and the component decorator takes the required configuration object which Angular needs to create and present a component and its view. So basically, the metadata in the component tells Angular where to get the major building blocks you specify for the components. The template, metadata, and the component together describes a view. The architectural takeaway is that you must add metadata to your code so that Angular knows what to do. Now let's talk about data binding. So let's assume if you're not using a framework like Angular, you have to push data values into the HTML controls and turn user responses into some actions and value updates. Writing such push-pull logic is a tedious and very error-prone. So here the data binding comes into picture, which is a mechanism for coordinating parts of template with parts of a component. So to make it work, we need to add data binding markup to the template HTML to tell Angular how to connect both sides. Now let's understand this with the help of few examples. The first one signifies interpolation, wherein the course.name interpolation displays the component's name property value within the li element. Next we have property binding, where the course property binding passes the value of selected course from the course component to the course property of the child course detail component. In the end, we have two-way data binding, which is an important part as it combines property and event binding in a single notation using the ng model directive. In two-way binding, a data property value flows to the input box from the component as with property binding, and when the user changes the input values from UI component, it automatically gets updated to the latest value through event binding. Coming up next, we have directives. So Angular templates are dynamic. When Angular renders them, it transforms the DOM according to the instructions given by directive. So a directive is a class with @directive decorator. In a simpler terms, a component is also a directive but with a template. Component decorative is actually a @directive decorator extended with template oriented feature. While a component is technically a directive, but components are so distinctive and central to Angular application that this architectural overview separates component from directives. So basically there are two kinds of directive. First one is structural and the second one is attribute directives. So here I have given examples for both structural directive and attribute directive just to make you understand how we make use of it in the user interface code, and I'm not going to dive into it because it's going to consume some time, but you can always refer to the actual or official Angular documentation to get more insights. Then we have services. So service is a broad category encompassing any value, function or feature that your application needs. Service is typically a class with a well-defined purpose which could be used throughout the application. For example, I have listed a few. First one is login service, then data service, message bus, tax calculator, or any application configuration, etc. So in a layman's term, it could be a piece of code which is being used throughout the application, but instead of defining it into every component, we define it into a single file which is being utilized throughout the application. Then just to touch upon a few more features, we have pipe. So pipes are a simple function to use in template expressions to accept an input value and return a transformed value. So pipes are useful because you can use them throughout your application while only declaring each pipe at once. Then we have router. In Angular, routing helps us to navigate from one view to another without refreshing the entire application as user performs tasks in web app. Then comes lazy loading. Lazy loading is a technique in Angular that allows you to load JavaScript components asynchronously when a specific route is activated. So it improves the overall speed of the application and load time by splitting the application into several bundles. So whenever we are loading any application, instead of downloading the entire chunk or entire piece of app in one go, we basically download the only necessary parts of the application on the go, and when user navigates through the app, the bundles are loaded as required. Then comes forms. So as we all are aware that forms are used to handle users input, and in Angular we can use forms in our application to enable user to log in or to update profile, to enter information, and to perform many other data entry tasks. In Angular there are basically two types of forms which handle user validation in different way. One of them is reactive form and the other one is template driven form. Then comes the most important part of the Angular is the unit testing. Unit tests are written in Jasmine and are run to see if individual part of an application is working correctly or not, and as a result unit test will either pass or fail depending on if the code is working correctly or has a bug. So in this way I have tried to cover a wide variety of concepts in this framework in a very short amount of time. But if you really want to learn this framework and get into front-end or UI development, you can always refer to the official Angular documentation. Then there are very few basic courses which are free on these sites which I have mentioned. The first one is Plural site, then we have Udemy, and I don't think there are free courses on Udemy, but the ones which are paid are really very good. Then you can always refer to Geeks for Geeks website to clear your object oriented programming concepts. So before directly starting with this study, I'll suggest you to have your basic understanding clear about CSS and HTML5, and for that you can refer to CSS3 tricks, Mozilla Developer Networks, and also this Google Web Fundamentals website is also really very good. It will help you to understand how websites or single page web application works. And then if you want to get more information about front-end development, or if you have any doubts or queries regarding Angular, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. And thank you for watching this video. Happy coding. Thank you.